You're listening to Short History Shorts Audio, where history speaks louder than images. In the turbulent political climate of the late Roman Republic, the Lex Agraria emerged not merely as a piece of legislation, but as a flashpoint in the struggle between Rome's entrenched aristocracy and reform-minded leaders who sought to address the economic and social crises undermining the stability of the state. To understand the Lex Agraria, we must first step back into the world from which it arose. A republic that had grown wealthy and vast from centuries of conquest, yet increasingly fractured by deep inequalities in land ownership, wealth distribution and political power. In the centuries before the Gracchan, the Roman Republic had relied heavily on the smallholder farmer-soldier, the yeoman who tilled his land and answered the call to arms when the legions marched. These citizen farmers formed not only the backbone of Rome's military power, but also the moral ideal of Roman virtue, hard-working, self-sufficient and deeply invested in the Republic's fate. However, as Rome's conquests expanded into Greece, the East, and across the Mediterranean, the spoils of war flowed disproportionately into the coffers of the senatorial elite. Vast tracts of conquered land, technically public property of the Roman people, ager publicus, were leased often indefinitely to wealthy patricians and equestrians. Over time, these elites consolidated their holdings into massive estates known as latifundia, worked largely by imported slave labour. The smallholder class, deprived of fair access to land and facing competition from these slave-run estates, began to wither. The toll of military service exacerbated the problem. Campaigns in distant provinces kept citizen soldiers away from their farms for years, sometimes decades, at a time. Many returned to find their farms ruined or seized by creditors. Lacking property, they no longer met the requirements for military service, further eroding Rome's traditional recruitment base and threatening the military system itself. By the mid-2nd century BC, the social and political consequences of this shift were impossible to ignore. Urban centres, especially Rome itself, swelled with landless poor. Displaced citizens who sought work as day labourers or subsisted on grain distributions. The wealthy, meanwhile, lived in increasing opulence, their power reinforced by a Senate that largely served their interests. It was in this volatile environment that the Lex Agraria became the central plank of the reform movement led by Tiberius Sempronius Gracchus. Elected tribune of the plebs in 133 BC, Tiberius proposed to address the crisis at its root, the inequitable distribution of land. The Lex Agraria sought to enforce long-neglected legal limits on the amount of ager publicus any individual could occupy. Limits that on paper restricted holdings to 500 jugera, about 300 acres, plus an allowance for each of a man's sons. Excess land would be reclaimed by the state and redistributed in small plots to landless citizens, reviving the smallholder class that had once been the lifeblood of the Republic. Tiberius' motives were a blend of idealism and political calculation. He was from an aristocratic family himself, the son of a former consul and the grandson of Scipio Africanus by marriage, but he recognized that the Republic's military and social fabric was fraying. Restoring free farmers to the countryside would, in his view, strengthen Rome's armies, reduce urban poverty, and revive the traditional Roman virtues of hard work and civic duty. His opponents, however, saw the Lex Agraria as a direct attack on their wealth and a dangerous precedent for state interference in property rights. The Senate, dominated by the landholding elite, resisted fiercely. Tiberius circumvented senatorial obstruction by taking his bill directly to the Concilium Plebis, the popular assembly, where he could count on the support of Rome's plebeian masses. This move was legal but provocative, challenging the Senate's customary role in guiding legislation. The debate over the Lex Agraria became a struggle not just over land, but over the very balance of power in the Republic. The rhetoric was heated, the stakes enormous. Supporters hailed it as a return to justice and the laws of the ancestors. Opponents decried it as demagoguery and an incitement to class warfare. In the end, the measure passed, and a special commission, composed of Tiberius, his brother Gaius, and their father-in-law Appius Claudius Pulcher, was established to oversee the land redistribution, but passing the law was only the beginning. Implementing it proved a monumental challenge. Land surveys had to be conducted across Italy to determine which tracts exceeded the legal limits and were eligible for reclamation. This process was slow, contentious, and often violent. Wealthy landholders resisted with lawsuits, political pressure, and, in some cases, outright intimidation of surveyors and commissioners. Tiberius's aggressive pursuit of the reform and his efforts to secure a second tribunate, ostensibly to protect the Lex Agraria from reversal, led to a political crisis. In a shocking turn, violence erupted in 133 BC when a mob of senators and their supporters attacked Tiberius and his followers in the Forum. Tiberius was beaten to death, along with hundreds of his supporters, marking one of the first major outbreaks of political bloodshed in the Republic's history. The Lex Agraria, however, did not die with him. His younger brother, Gaius Gracchan, would revive and expand the reform a decade later, adding provisions for the establishment of colonies, grain subsidies, and judicial reforms aimed at curbing senatorial abuses. Gaius's version of the Lex Agraria continued the land redistributions, though it too faced entrenched resistance. The long-term effects of the Lex Agraria were mixed. It did succeed in placing thousands of poor citizens on small plots of land, temporarily bolstering the smallholder base. Yet the reforms could not halt the broader economic forces driving the concentration of land into fewer hands. Many recipients of redistributed land lacked the means to farm it profitably, and over time much of it drifted back into the hands of the wealthy. Politically, however, the Lex Agraria was transformative. It demonstrated that the popular assemblies could be mobilized to bypass the Senate, inaugurating a new era of popular politics that would shape the careers of figures like Marius, Sulla, and Caesar. It also set a precedent for violent conflict as a tool of political resolution, eroding the norms of peaceful governance that had sustained the Republic for centuries. The Lex Agraria stands as a case study in the difficulty of reforming entrenched systems of inequality. Its promise was bold, to restore the balance between rich and poor, city and countryside, Senate and people, but its implementation revealed the deep fractures within Roman society. It was both a moment of hope for those who believed in the Republic's capacity to renew itself and a harbinger of the turmoil that would eventually bring the Republic to an end. In the end, the Lex Agraria's legacy is not merely the parcels of land it redistributed, but the political awakening it sparked, a recognition among Rome's dispossessed that the machinery of the state could, at least in theory, be used to serve their interests, and a recognition among the elite that such challenges to their dominance would be met with every weapon at their disposal, including violence. It was a lesson both sides would remember and replay in the bloody decades to come.